How to reset your dopamine and change your life. Dopamine and your drive, what's the deal? Basically, dopamine is this brain chemical that we've accidentally figured out how to hack in today's world. Think about it, our phones, social media, that greasy fast food, even a few drinks, all of these things jack up our dopamine levels, giving us instant gratification and pleasure. But here's the kicker, we're getting hooked on these massive dopamine hits. This means it's getting harder and harder to do the things that actually matter to us. It's like, so many people today are just struggling to make moves toward their goals. They have these dreams, right? Big career plans, or they're like, yeah, I really want to get in shape. They get a little burst of motivation, but then it just fizzles out. It's 'cause modern life is full of dopamine traps, making us feel good now but messing up our motivation for later. Finding your balance, why it's crucial for motivation. Society needs to get this. Getting this chemical in balance is the secret sauce to actually staying focused and consistently motivated. Meet TJ Power. He's a neuroscientist who heads up the Dose Lab, a place that's all about understanding the 4 big brain chemicals that run our daily lives: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. We're gonna dive deep into each one of these in a 4-part video series, and you'll get practical tips in every episode to boost these brain chemicals in a healthy way and totally level up your life. Fingers crossed, right? So, in this video, episode 1 of the 4-part series, we're tackling dopamine. Let's do this. Part 1, the lowdown on dopamine. The lowdown on dopamine, your brain's reward system. Dopamine 101, your motivation currency. So, dopamine does a bunch of things in our brains, but when it comes to our reward system, it's basically the main currency that motivates us to get stuff done. Back when we were evolving as Homo sapiens, dopamine was the chemical pushing us to do things that kept us alive, which is way different from how we live now. Our brains spent, like, 300,000 years developing for a totally different lifestyle, a lifestyle where we had to wake up, hunt for food, build shelter, connect with each other, and, fight each other. That's what our brains are designed for. And dopamine was this chemical deep inside us that pushed us to tackle all these challenges so we could survive. But in today's world, we've basically figured out how to hack that feeling, that rush we get from hunting, connecting with people, or building shelter. We hack it with stuff like porn, TikTok, cigarettes, booze, you name it. And that ends up creating some serious problems with our dopamine system, especially with our baseline dopamine levels. Dopamine, how it's made and why it matters. Dopamine is made inside nerve cells called neurons in our brain. It all starts with an amino acid called tyrosine, which then gets turned into L-dopa. L-dopa then becomes dopamine, and this dopamine is stored in these little pouches called vesicles, which hang out at the end of our neurons. So, the dopamine is ready to be released at synapses, basically the points between neurons in our brain, where they talk to each other. But here's the cool part, we make dopamine when we do hard things. And the harder the thing is, the more dopamine we make. It's like this chemical evolved to be earned. So, the whole system works like this: if we do something that takes effort, dopamine starts to build up in our brain. And dopamine actually hangs out in these little bubbles called vesicles. Any activity that requires hard work will literally create more of these vesicles in the brain. So, if the first thing you do after waking up is grab your phone and scroll through Instagram or TikTok, you're gonna use up your dopamine stores, and you won't feel motivated to do anything else all day. It's like popping all those little dopamine bubbles. But if you start your day with something like exercise, making your bed, or even just stepping outside, you'll build up your dopamine reserves instead of draining them. That means you'll have way more motivation to work on the stuff you actually want to achieve. And this is basically the law of dopamine. The law of dopamine: move your body, boost your brain. The law of dopamine is all about taking action as soon as you wake up. I mean, the moment you open your eyes, the most important thing you can do is get moving. Dopamine is literally involved in movement. There's this whole bed rotting trend on TikTok right now, where people, especially teenage girls, feel like they literally can't get out of bed. They call it rotting, and it's because their dopamine is so low from all the TikTok and sugar and stuff that they just can't take any action. If you wake up and just get your system going, even if it feels awful at first, and honestly, the more awful it feels, the more dopamine you're gonna make, because it works on that whole pain-pleasure balance, you're setting yourself up for success. If you start living by that principle, taking action when you wake up, it just means your dopamine is on the right track from the get-go. 2 questions to check your dopamine habits. Now, there are 2 really good questions you can ask yourself to figure out if something's good for your dopamine or not. How fast does this thing give me pleasure? Things that are naturally pleasurable will slowly increase your dopamine, and you won't have that huge crash afterward. But if something gives you a massive hit of dopamine right away, that instant gratification, it's probably not a healthy way to boost your dopamine. You'll just come crashing down, and you won't feel great. If you suddenly get that huge TikTok dopamine spike, then you put your phone down and you're like, ugh, I feel like crap. You're apathetic, you can't do anything, and it's because your brain is so thrown off by that unnatural spike that it just crashes. Is this going to benefit me or someone else in the future? If the answer is yes, then it's probably healthy dopamine. Think, cooking dinner instead of ordering takeout, going for a walk with a friend, or even hitting that like button for the YouTube algorithm, wink, wink. But if the answer is no, then it's generally not a great way to boost your dopamine. This might be things like scrolling on TikTok for hours, smoking, vaping, or drinking. Disclaimer. I'm not saying you can only ever do things that contribute to your personal development. But if you're trying to take back control of your dopamine, if you're struggling to focus and constantly getting distracted, then it's worth understanding how dopamine plays into all of this. Maybe try shifting your balance away from those instant gratification things that only give you pleasure in the moment and towards slower things that can actually improve your life in the long run. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, these are just some ideas. Take M or leave M. Bonus tip. By the way, singing with a group, exercising with a group, or working with a group makes whatever you're doing feel way better. And that's where the sponsor of this video comes in, which is actually me. This video is sponsored by our own product, Productivity Lab. Productivity Lab, get more done with the power of group focus. If you're the kind of person who works from home a lot, maybe your day job, your side hustle, your book project, your memoir, your YouTube channel, whatever, and you find yourself sitting at your computer but not actually doing what you plan to do, then Productivity Lab is gonna be perfect for you. Basically, Productivity Lab is an online platform and community of entrepreneurs, creators, and professionals. We all get together and work together in what we call Focus Labs. We also do weekly reflective workshops where you look back on your week, set goals, and plan for the next one. It's like an accountability system. I like to think of it as CrossFit or Peloton for productivity. You're joining a Zoom co-working session with other people. I join these for 3 hours every morning because I just get way more done when I'm in a focus lab, knowing that other people are on screen, virtually, also doing their work. Doing this every day has pretty much doubled my productivity. And we've had so many success stories from people in Productivity Lab. They've said things like, hey, I've been putting off starting my YouTube channel forever, but then I joined Focus Labs, and now I've actually done it. Or, I spent 5 years planning to make this iOS app, but I never actually did it. Then I joined a few Focus Labs, and now I've built my minimum viable product. So, people in Productivity Lab are getting some seriously awesome results. Actionable strategies to control dopamine. Part 2, 4 ways to take control of your dopamine. Alright, so now let's jump into 4 actionable ways to take back control of the dopamine in our brains. And what I love about these tips from TJ is that anyone can start using them pretty much as soon as you're done watching this video. Action number 1, phone fasting. Yeah, so with dopamine, the first thing to understand, and this is the most effective thing we've seen in all our research and training, is this concept we've developed called phone fasting. It's just having set times when you agree with yourself to fast from your phone, quotation marks there. The most crucial time to fast from your phone is when you first wake up. Your brain's waking up, it's looking for that dopamine hit, it's ready to attack the day. If you go straight to your phone, you're setting yourself up for a much tougher time. So, if you're someone who unlocks your phone the second you wake up, then probably the best thing to do is charge your phone somewhere outside your room and use something else as an alarm clock. Then, try doing these 3 things right after you wake up. Go brush your teeth. I mean, hopefully, you're doing that every day anyway, so might as well do it first thing. Splash your face with cold water. That'll help wake you up. Make your bed. And all of this is in line with the law of dopamine because we're physically taking action, immediately boosting those dopamine stores instead of instantly draining them. Ideally, we want to be phone fasting for at least 15 minutes every single morning. And then, in the evenings, it's great to aim for 60 minutes before bed without your phone. Now, here's another interesting thing about dopamine: we build up our dopamine stores when we're bored. But we usually don't let ourselves get bored because we're always reaching for our phones or whatever device we have on us. Actually, when you're bored, your brain starts generating dopamine. It goes into this restorative state where it's like, oh, I've got a break, time to make some dopamine. If you don't let your brain have those moments of boredom, and constantly stimulate it, it's not great for your dopamine levels. That's why TJ recommends trying a 2-hour phone fast on Saturdays and Sundays and really embracing that feeling of boredom instead of always running from it. For me, I apply this when I go for walks. I try not to have my phone out, listening to audiobooks or podcasts or music. I keep my phone and my AirPods with me, just in case, and a little notebook and a pen. So, if I'm chilling at a cafe or on a park bench, I can do some journaling. And I like to think that helps boost my overall dopamine levels over time. Action number 2, find your flow. Okay, so I'm gonna quote psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi here: our most rewarding activities are not natural. They demand an effort that initially one is reluctant to make, but once the interaction starts to provide feedback to the person's skills, it usually begins to be intrinsically enjoyable. Now, what Csikszentmihalyi is describing here is the flow state, which is a concept he came up with in the 1970s. When we're in flow, we're hyper-focused on that one thing we're doing. And generally, to get into flow, there needs to be a match between our skill level and how challenging the task is. So, if something's too easy, you're probably gonna feel bored instead of in flow. But if it's too hard, you might feel anxious and stressed out. To get into that flow state, we need to find that sweet spot between challenge and skill. Sometimes that means even artificially adding a challenge if something feels too easy, or trying to reduce our anxiety and stress if we're putting too much pressure on ourselves. Now, here's the cool part: researchers have done studies where they scan people's brains to see what areas are most active when they're in flow. And these studies show that our reward system and dopamine pathways are heavily involved. When we get into that flow state, it builds up dopamine like crazy because our brains are like, whoa, they really need me right now. Think of dopamine as your friend. When you're tackling something challenging, it's like, oh, he needs backup. Help him focus. We know that flow is really common in athletes, artists, and scientists because their work is highly skilled and challenging. But we can all experience flow in everyday stuff, too: cooking, studying, even cleaning, if we find those optimal conditions. And on average, it takes about 15 minutes to get into a flow state. So, keep in mind that the first 15 minutes of doing something that seems a bit boring are always gonna be the toughest. That's when your dopamine is at its lowest. A good example is cleaning the bathroom. That's a pretty annoying chore, right? You'll probably find the first 5 minutes suck, but gradually you start to gain momentum. After 10 minutes or so, you might actually start getting into it. And then the opposite can happen. Instead of being bothered, you get way more into it than you expected. That's because you've basically entered cleaning flow state. I find this to be a super helpful insight. Like, the starting part of anything is always the hardest. Procrastination is usually just difficulty starting something, not actually doing it. When I'm filming, for example, this is my job these days, filming these videos, the first hour is always me just procrastinating, looking at the script and thinking, oh, this isn't good enough, or this isn't gonna get any views, or why does anyone even care, or oh my god, why am I even qualified to talk about this? But then, when I hit record and just start filming, slowly the dopamine builds up. It starts to become kind of fun, I start having a good time with it, I get more animated. And like, right now, I'm enjoying filming this video, it's fun. I remember this was also the case when I was in med school. It was really hard to start studying for exams. But then, once I got into the flow of it, I had my study with me music playing, Pirates of the Caribbean, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, the whole shebang, it actually started to become enjoyable. So, if you struggle with starting things, know that it's totally normal. Your dopamine levels are low, but they'll increase over time. Action number 3, cold water immersion. Alright, let's move on to action number 3, cold water immersion. This has actually been shown to cause a similar increase in dopamine as cocaine. But the key difference is that cocaine spikes our dopamine super fast, in about 9 minutes, but then it drops off quickly. Cold water, on the other hand, increases our dopamine more gradually over a 2-hour period. A brilliant psychologist back in 1998 called Ceramic discovered for the first time that cold water immersion can raise our dopamine levels by 250%, that's 2.5 times. And when you get into this cold water stuff, it's really important to understand this concept called the pain-pleasure balance. This comes from a really interesting theory from 1980 by a behavioral psychologist, Richard Solomon, called the opponent process theory of acquired motivation. Basically, it says that pleasure and pain are opposite emotions, and we need to keep them balanced, like on a seesaw. So, when you eat your favorite food, for example, and it makes you feel great, the seesaw tips toward pleasure. But then, afterward, an opposite reaction kicks in, like guilt, if you're like me and ate a whole mango sticky rice with ice cream yesterday. And that guilt tips the seesaw back to neutral. Now, Dr. Anna Lemke, a psychiatrist at Stanford, talks about this in her book, Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence. She writes, I tend to imagine this self-regulating system as little gremlins hopping on the pain side of the balance to counteract the weight on the pleasure side. The gremlins represent the work of homeostasis, the tendency of any living system to maintain a physiologic equilibrium. And things get really interesting because, as Dr. Lemke writes, with repeated exposure to the same or similar pleasure stimulus, the initial deviation to the side of pleasure gets weaker and shorter, and the after-response to the side of pain gets stronger and longer, a process scientists call neuroadaptation. That is, with repetition, our gremlins get bigger, faster, and more numerous, and we need more of our drug of choice to get the same effect. And obviously, that drug could be anything we find addictive, fast food, alcohol, TikTok, whatever. But then the opposite happens when we experience pain first, like with cold water. At first, it's really hard and uncomfortable to stay in cold water, like taking a cold shower or doing an ice plunge. But then, in response to the pain, our body activates those reward pathways. So, the seesaw tips back into balance, towards pleasure. And the more you do this, the less intense that initial pain will be, but those feelings of pleasure will happen sooner and might even be more intense. The most sustainable way to do this is just to have 30 seconds of cold at the end of every shower. That'll give you a nice, natural increase in dopamine, boosting your motivation and focus. The importance of a clear goal, find your why. Find your mountain, why you need a clear goal. And then the final action, action number 4, is what TJ calls my pursuit. And this goes back to the importance of always having a clear mountain you're climbing in life. And this was huge for me. I actually struggled a lot with all the addictive stuff our modern world has to offer. And I had to figure out what I was gonna chase instead of all that quick dopamine. And that's where the whole idea of my pursuit came from, that if you're addicted to all these different things, the only real way to break free is to have something else you're chasing, something you're willing to sacrifice for. If you're just doing stuff without a clear mission, purpose, or goal, eventually your brain's just gonna sabotage you. Our brains are really good at recognizing when we're doing something that feels pointless. But if you're working towards something, building something, supporting your family, whatever your goal is, if you have that goal firmly in mind, it means that all the stuff you have to do to get there feels very directed. And it actually becomes kind of fun to do the thing when you know you're working towards a specific goal. Figuring out your why, practical tips. Now, a question I often get asked is, okay, but how do I figure out what my purpose is, my mission, my primary pursuit? This is a big one. I actually have a whole 3-part playlist about this: how to figure out what you truly value, how to connect it with your own life experiences, how to turn that into goals. I'll link it up there or down there or something, so you can check it out. But TJ's solution, which I totally agree with, is to start spending at least 60 minutes in nature every day, without your phone, without music, and without a podcast. Now, at first, you'll probably feel bored and frustrated. But once you push past those uncomfortable feelings, it becomes a lot easier to answer that question: what is my primary pursuit? What do I really care about chasing? In my case, I personally feel most creative when I'm out on walks in Regent's Park in London, or if I'm just walking to a local coffee shop and sitting there alone with my thoughts. And the more you ask yourself this question, the better you'll get at figuring out your goals and the plans and systems you need to put in place to achieve them. This is the whole philosophy behind the productivity GPS. GPS stands for goal, plan, and system. It's a productivity method I've been working on over the last couple of years. Alright, so that's it for today's deep dive into dopamine and how to make it work for you, not against you. If you're ready to take control of your motivation and really start crushing your goals, then you need to check out my playlist, How to Succeed in Life. It's packed with actionable strategies and tips to help you unlock your full potential. You'll find the link to that playlist in the description below. And hey, if you found this video helpful, do me a solid and smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future uploads. Let me know in the comments what your biggest takeaway was from this video, and what you're going to start doing today to master your dopamine. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.